This is the second part in the series of two lectures regarding the creation of mathematics expressions using the field code feature of MS Word. While the first part covered the basics of field codes for different mathematics expressions, this part covers how we can associate shortcut keys for these field codes. To illustrate how beneficial shortcut keys can be, we create a few mathematics expressions in real time. First, the fraction a over b. Here's x cubed. And here is a 3 by 2 matrix. On the screen, these mathematics expressions were created in real time. There is no video editing, just the use of the shortcut keys. Before we can create any shortcut keys, we need to decide where we want to store the macros and shortcut keys. This document can also serve as the template where our macros and shortcut keys will be readily available. In addition, should we create future macros, we can save them in this very same template document. Let's just start with a blank document. We save the file using the appropriate file type. The default for Word is .docx or .doc. The default for Word is either .doc or .docx. These file types will not allow us to store our macros and shortcut keys, and so we need a different file type. What we need is a .docm file, which is a macro-enabled document. So we choose .docm and let us call this file template1. Of course, you can decide on the file name for yourself if and when you create your own macros and shortcut keys. One more recommendation. When sending a document with math expressions to another person, save the file as a PDF or as a .docx. Send the file as a PDF file or as a .docx file. We are now ready for our first macro and shortcut keys. We go and click on View. Go to Macros. Click on Macros. And then we click on Record Macro. We then get this dialog box that asks us for the macro name. Now let us suppose that this macro is for creating fractions. And so we call this macro fraction. We then need to decide the file where the macro and shortcut keys will be stored. At the moment, it says that the macro will be stored in the file normal.dotm. Now, this is the normal template for all new documents for Word. And it is important that we do not mess with the normal template for Word. Click here and see that we have a second option, and that option is template 1. So we click on template 1 to store the macro and the shortcut keys in template 1. Again, do not mess with normal.dotm. Now we assign the shortcut keys. Click on Keyboard, and a second dialog box appears. This dialog box asks us what the shortcut key or keys are supposed to be. Since this is for a fraction which involves division, let's associate Ctrl/. Now, we recommend writing down the macro name and shortcut key on a sheet of paper in case you forget the macro and the shortcut key. Take a look at this piece of information. According to this piece of information, Ctrl/ is associated with the prefix key. Now, if you don't use the prefix feature of Word, you can stick with Control slash. Otherwise, choose a different shortcut key. As for ourselves, we don't use the prefix feature, so we'll stick with Control slash. In this box, we are again being asked where to save this macro. It says here that it's normal.dotm, or the normal template. And let us remind ourselves, we do not want to mess with the normal.dotm file or the normal template of Word. Click here and see that template 1 is an option. So we select template 1. We click Assign and close this dialog box. The recording of our macro has begun. This means that every keystroke we make, including mistakes, are being recorded. If we do make a mistake or change our mind about the macro or the shortcut key, we can easily delete the macro and start over. Now, while the macro is being recorded, we start with the field code. We start the fraction in the same way we start math expressions using field codes. Press Ctrl F9 to call up the field code brackets. Type EQ, space, backslash, and F. F, of course, for fraction. Then we type the pair of parentheses that will enclose both the numerator and the denominator. Now, there is also this annoying space between the closing parenthesis and the closing bracket. We delete this space to avoid the creation of unwanted spaces in our fraction. We bring the cursor inside the pair of parentheses. We leave the fraction blank so that what we have is something like a blank check that we call up by using our shortcut keys. We are just about done with this macro. To finish, we go to Macros, we go and click on Macros, and click Stop Recording. So we have just created our first macro. Now, time to field test our new limited fraction macro. Let's clear everything. Press the shortcut keys for the fraction macro. And do you remember what the shortcut keys are supposed to be? It's Control slash. Pressing Control slash, the fraction field appears. The cursor is between the pair of parentheses. We type the numerator, which for now, let's say it's A. Type comma, and then the denominator, and let's just say it's B. Cut this entire line of code and paste, and you have A over B. The next macro that we will create is the macro for exponentiation. Click on View, click on Macros, and click on Record Macro. In this dialog box, we enter the name of the macro. We call it exponent. Then we choose the file in which to save the macro. It says here again that it is normal.dotm. One more time, do not mess with the normal template. So we click and choose template 1. Now for the shortcut keys. Click on keyboard for the shortcut keys to bring out the second dialog box. For exponentiation, let us try Ctrl-Shift-E. It says here that these keys are associated with Tools Revision Marks Toggle. It's not a tool or feature that we use, so we'll override this. Now, if you do use this feature, you might want to choose a different shortcut key. Just remember that you have to be careful when choosing the shortcut key, in that you do not override a very important tool or feature that you often use in Word. We would not override tools or features such as underlining or making a character in bold or italics. It says here again that the macro is to be saved in normal.dotm, which is the normal template. Again, Do not mess with the normal template. So we click on this and select template 1. Click Assign, and then close the dialog box, so that now any keystroke that we make, including mistakes, will be recorded as part of the macro. We bring out the field code brackets by pressing Ctrl F9. Type EQ space backslash and S for superscript or subscript. Type another backslash and type up since we want an exponent. Then we choose how much to raise the exponent above the main line. Let's try raising the character 4 points. So we type 4. Of course, you can try out different values until you find a value to your liking. We type a pair of parentheses to enclose the exponent. Again, remove the annoying space between the closing parenthesis and the closing field code bracket. Then bring the cursor where the exponent is supposed to be inside the pair of parentheses. Normally, exponents are written in smaller font than the base of the exponentiation. So we reduce the font size inside the pair of parentheses. Let's try a font size that is 3 steps smaller than the regular font size. So we press Ctrl Shift less than 3 times to reduce the font size by 3 steps. And that's it. We click on Macro to stop the recording. We have just created our exponentiation macro. Now it's time for a field test. Let us try writing y to the 10th power. We type the base y and then the exponent 10. For the exponent, we call up our exponent macro using our shortcut keys. Now, do you remember the shortcut keys? It's Ctrl Shift E. Pressing these keys, we get the field code for our exponent macro. We type 10 inside the parentheses. Cut and paste. Voila, y to the 10th power. For a final example, we'll work on the macro for a matrix. Click View, click Macros, click Record Macro, and in this dialog box, we first name the macro matrix. Again, it says here that the macro will be saved in normal.dotm. That's the normal template. And what did we say about normal.dotm or the normal template? Do not mess with the normal template. So we select template 1. Click Keyboard, and we get the dialog box for the shortcut keys. It says here one more time that the macro will be saved in normal.dotm. Now we don't want that, of course. Again, we do not want to mess with the normal template. So we choose template 1. Now we select the shortcut keys. Let's try Ctrl Shift M. It says here that these keys are currently assigned to unindent. Now it could be different for you, but for us, we hardly use unindent, and so we will override unindent and assign Ctrl Shift M to the matrix macro. Click Assign, click Close. So the recording of the macro has started. We call up the field code brackets by pressing Ctrl F9, type EQ space backslash B for bracket, backslash BC since we want the matrix enclosed on both sides by brackets, or parentheses, or braces, or any character that we choose. Type backslash and then a square bracket, which is what we're going to use to enclose our matrix. Type a pair of parentheses to enclose the entries of the matrix. Then remove this annoying space between the closing parenthesis and the closing field code bracket. Bring the cursor inside the parentheses. Now we have to use a second field code, and that is for an array. We call up the field code brackets inside the pair of parentheses, type EQ, space, backslash, and then A for array. Type backslash. Now we will also incorporate some typesetting options here to put a little sparkle in our matrix, so to speak. The first typesetting option is for centering the entries of each column. So we type AC, which probably means a line along the center. We type backslash, and the second typesetting option is for creating a gap or space between the columns of the matrix. So we create horizontal spacing by typing HS. Then let's try 5 points for the spacing between columns. So we type 5. We type backslash again to get ready for the next typesetting option, which is for vertical spacing, or the spacing between the rows. So we type VS. Let's try a vertical spacing of 2 points. So we type 2. We now type a pair of parentheses for the entries. Again, remove this annoying space between the closing parenthesis and the closing field code bracket. We bring the cursor after VS2 and just before the opening parenthesis. You might ask, well, what about the number of columns or rows? Do you think we should specify the number of columns or rows now? What do you think? Okay, not this time, because we don't want to be locked onto a specific set of dimensions for all matrices that we might create in the future. So we'll leave this option for the dimensions open and specify the dimensions only when we are creating an actual matrix. We will demonstrate this in the field test of our matrix macro. We click on macros and stop the recording. Now time for the field test. We press our shortcut keys for the matrix macro. Remember, it's Ctrl-Shift-M. We get our matrix field code. The cursor is between the vertical spacing VS2 and the opening parenthesis. It is at this time that we specify the number of columns. If we do specify the number of columns, MS Word will automatically determine the number of rows. That is, if we do not specify the number of columns, we will get a column matrix. So if we just enter the matrix entries, such as A, B, C, D, E, F, between the parentheses, and cut, and then paste, we get a column matrix. Let us start over with a matrix with the same entries but with 3 columns. Press our shortcut keys. To specify the number of columns, we type backslash after VS2, and then we type CO for columns, and then the number of columns, which we choose to be 3. Bring the cursor inside the parentheses and type the entries A, B, C, D, E, F. Cut, and then paste, and we get a matrix with 3 columns. And of course, it has 2 rows.